Alright guys, so today we're going to talk about deductive reasoning. Our objective is to continue to work with number patterns. We're going to understand the difference between inductive and deductive reasoning, and we're going to be introduced to the law of detachment and the law of syllogism. So let's start off by looking at this first definition. It says you've been using inductive reasoning, and that's when we were doing the number patterns and finding the nth term. What you didn't realize is that you were also using deductive reasoning when you used your rule for the nth term to find another term. So what deductive reasoning is it is using rules and the process of logic to draw conclusions based on facts, definitions, and properties. So we're using these rules and we're using some of the logic going on in our brain, and we make decisions based off these facts and these definitions and these properties. So let's look at some examples, and let's try to determine whether we're using inductive or deductive reasoning. So the first one says, the first 4 times Susan ate peanuts, she became ill. Her mother decided peanuts are bad for Susan. So remember, inductive means that we're talking about patterns. Deductive reasoning means we're talking about some sort of rule. So the first 4 times Susan ate peanuts, she became ill. Her mother decided peanuts are bad for Susan. Well, that would be inductive reasoning. She's had a pattern. The first 4 times she ate it, she got sick. So the pattern was that she got sick after she ate peanuts. So therefore, peanuts are bad for Susan. Let's look at the next one. It says, knowing that for all real numbers C and D, C minus D is equal to C plus negative D. So then you decide that 3 minus 7 is equal to 3 plus negative 7. Well, in this case, we're not using any sort of patterns. We're using the rule. We're using a rule. And so this case, this would be deductive reasoning, because the information we're using is based off of some rule that we know. The next one. A music director announced, anybody who misses 2 or more rehearsals will not be permitted to sing in our concert. After being out of town during 3 rehearsals, Herb said, well, I can't sing in the concert. So this is going to be deductive reasoning as well. There wasn't a pattern, it was just a rule that was given to the kids. If you miss the rehearsals, you're not going to be able to sing. So Herb knew that after he missed these 3 rehearsals, he wasn't going to be able to sing because that was the rule. And the last one. On March 1st, a family went bowling. Again, on April 1st, May 1st, and June 1st, the family went bowling. The youngest child announced, we will always go bowling on the 1st of the month. Well, this is true because of the pattern that they saw. They were using inductive reasoning. So if I have a pattern, it's inductive reasoning. If I am basing my new information off of a rule, then it's deductive reasoning. So in deductive reasoning, if the given facts are true and you apply correct logics, then the conclusion must be true as well. So let's keep that in mind as we move forward with deductive reasoning. So now let's look at the back page and let's get a little bit more into deductive reasoning. So, wrong page. All right. So now we're going to talk about applying the law of detachment and the law of syllogism in logical reasoning. So we've talked about the difference between inductive and deductive reasoning and when we were working with number patterns. Now we're going to learn some valid forms of deductive reasoning. So we already said that deductive reasoning was using rules and logic to draw conclusions based on facts, definitions, and properties. And this is just the definition from the other side that we wrote down. So deductive reason is using these rules because the things that we know are true. So there's 2 different types of deductive reasoning that we're going to talk about, the law of detachment and the law of syllogism. So let's start off with the law of detachment. The law of detachment says that if P happens, Q happens. So then when P does happen, that we know, therefore, Q is going to happen. So remember we talked about P's and Q's in last class. P is some sort of hypothesis, what we think, and then Q is the conclusion. So if the hypothesis happens, therefore, the Q will happen. So let's look at the first example. If you have 3 tardies, then you go to detention. Charlie has 3 tardies. Well, this first part right here, these tardies would be our P. And then you go to detention would be our Q. If you have 3 tardies, then you go to detention. Well, Charlie has 3 tardies. This is the P again. So then our conclusion would have to be Q. So P happened. If P happens, then Q happens. P did happen, so therefore Q has to happen. So my conclusion is that therefore Charlie goes to detention. All right, let's look at the law of syllogism. The law of syllogism says that if P happens, then Q happens, and if Q happens, then R happens, and then therefore P implies that R happens. So in this case, we're adding an extra step. If P happens, then Q happens, and then if Q happens, R happens. Therefore, when P happens, R happens. So let's look at an example. If the measure of angle A is less than 90 degrees, and then angle A is acute. If angle A is acute angle, then angle A is not a right angle. So if angle A is less than 90 degrees, that is our P. Angle A being an acute angle would be our Q. So then I say my Q one more time. Still Q. And then it says then R, angle A is not a right angle, which is our R. So it says if P happens, then Q happens. So if angle A is less than 90 degrees, then angle A is acute. The next part says if angle A is an acute angle, then angle A is not a right angle. So Q implies R. So therefore, P, that's not a P, P must imply R. So therefore, if the measure of angle A is less than 90 degrees, then, so this was P and it should lead to R, then angle A is not a right angle. Now some people would use the negate symbol here too because we're talking about knots, and that would be fine as well. So my conclusion from all this is taking the first part, if angle A is less than 90 degrees, then angle A is not a right angle. And that's what we wrote. Therefore, that is true. All right, so let's look at some other examples. It says, based on the information, form a conclusion, if possible, using the law of detachment or the law of syllogism. So let's first look at the first one. If 2 segments are congruent, then they have the same length. Segment AG is congruent to segment XY. So in this case, this part right here is my P. And then the next part is my Q. If 2 segments are congruent, then they have the same length. So here's my congruent statement again, which is a P. So I know P implies, if P then Q, P happened, so therefore Q has to happen. So therefore AB is equal to XY, because AB and XY have the same measure. And let's look at the last one. it says if a number is divisible by 4, then it's divisible by 2. If a number is even, then it's divisible by 2. So this first part, if a number is divisible by 4, that would be my P. And then it says then it's divisible by 2, which would be my Q. Then it says if a number is even, which is a whole different statement from the first two, so that must mean my R. And then it says then is divisible by 2, so I'm having a Q again. So in this case I have P, which implies Q happens, but then I have R, also implies Q. So from this case, I can't make a conclusion because it doesn't follow either law. So there is no conclusion.